Welcome to Words with Walner, episode number 23. John Walner.
Wow, Michael Jordan's number 23. Look at that.
That's right. And of course, we're here with John Walner, the most popular and the best personal injury lawyer in Chicago. John Walner.
I'll vote for that.
Yes. And we have a guest here today because we are going to talk about bicycling in Chicago. And we have Leo Koenig, who is a bicycle enthusiast here in Chicago and has lots of experience in bike riding around Chicago. So we will dive into a little bit about on the law side, who's at fault. But let's talk about Chicago. It's a dynamic city. We've got somewhere around 645 miles of trails and bicycle routes all throughout the city. Tell me more about how'd you get started in bicycle riding?
So yeah, my name is Leo. I am a bicycle enthusiast. The one thing I would add to that is also I use bikes not just for pleasure, but also like for my primary way of getting around the city. I don't drive a car. I walk. I'm a pedestrian as well. But the main thing ever since I moved to Chicago a few years back is just using my bicycle for everyday things like getting to work and back, going to the store and back.
Do you not own a car?
I do not own a car, no.
And what do you do in the winter?
I still bike in the winter. As long as there's not huge amounts of ice or slush on the ground, you can still get it done. But yeah, as long as I can remember, I've always loved to ride bikes. When I was a kid, I biked to school, biked around the neighborhood with my friends and all that stuff. So it taught me a lot about, my sense of direction and just kind of like being independent and how to stay safe on a bike as well. I was never allowed to bike without a helmet when I was a kid, and I still never leave without a helmet today. So just kind of always remembering how to stay safe out there and be smart are some of the things I always try to keep in mind.
There's two duties, right? So it's great that you ride a bike, and the Chicagoland offers you many routes to travel on to go to and from work or business, home. We have a tremendous amount of sidewalks and bike lanes that the city of Chicago has built and maintained for, obviously, for pollution and pleasure and to reduce congestion in the city. Correct? So what are the duties for people not riding a bike to bike riders? What is the duty of a bike rider to people that are pedestrians or cars, buses, or other moving vehicles that are faster than a bicycle? And that's where we run into trouble in Chicago with people outside of bike lanes and cars hitting them because the cars can't navigate if a person's not using the bike lane. And we see the frustration of car drivers, and sometimes it'll lead into an accident when a car driver's sharing a moving lane of traffic with a bicyclist. So this is what the city of Chicago's done. Said if you're riding a bike along a business street, you got to ride in a bike lane, and that's the law in the city of Chicago. If you can ride on a sidewalk, if you're 12 years old or older, only if it's designated as a bike route. But of course, you can use sidewalks to go in and out of traffic, to a street or off a street. You can use a sidewalk as a rampway to get yourself out of the intersection. So now, with a plethora of the city of Chicago providing these bike lanes and these sidewalks, there's got to be certain rules and regulations of both people to each other to avoid accidents and injuries and the loss of life, which you see in Chicago at certain places that are heavily traveled. When there wasn't a barrier between the bicyclists and the cars, you've seen wrongful deaths occur, which are tragic.
Yeah, most of them seem to be happening on the roadway. So just to make it clear, like when you're on the bike path, there are accidents, but most of them where they're really serious are happening on the streets and on the roadways. That's where it's the collision between the bicyclist and the vehicle.
Just so our listeners are aware, bicycles don't have a right to where everyone bows down to a bicyclist when they drive, because the city of Chicago said, we have a tremendous amount of traffic. We're a huge city. We have a concentrated city center. We're going to build these bike lanes, which they've done. They put a tremendous amount of money into building bike lanes. If a bicyclist decides to go on their own and not go in a bike lane, then you have to be. You are not free from negligence. First of all, you are negligent. You are going against the law. And you are going into a moving lane of traffic with a car where you shouldn't be, because the city said we're going to put hundreds of millions of dollars into putting these bike lanes in. We're going to mark these lanes. We're going to tell you the streets that there are ways to go on a bicycle to this destination. So Now you have two people competing in the same roadway. Let's make sure that we each don't violate each other's route of travel. So it's a delicate touch when you're not in the bike lane and you are in a congested area. When you're in the suburbs, that doesn't apply. When you're in or a residential area of Chicago, not our main streets like Lincoln, Dearborn, Clark, like State. There's main streets in Chicago, Jeffrey, 72nd Street, whether you're on the south side or north side, there's main thoroughways, and there's bike paths provided for you in those areas where there's a lot of congestion.
Leo, what type of challenges do you face as a bicyclist here in Chicago?
I think the main one is that these bike networks don't always connect to each other. So let's take my work route to and from my home. I live in Logan Square, so I take Milwaukee Avenue for most of my ride. But if I want to diverge off of that and go to a store or go to something like that, it's not always going to connect to another bike lane. So you then have to make a decision of, am I going to go into a busy street and risk, being in traffic, or am I going to dismount my bike and walk, or am I going to take a side street? And, being here and being in this area specifically, I've kind of figured out which routes work best for me and things like that. And so I don't find myself in too many close call situations, but, I have had experiences. There was one time where I was biking north on Damon, and I was near Fullerton, kind of there's a Costco over there. It's an intersection. It does have a bike lane, so I was in a bike lane. And then there was a car that pulled out of the Costco parking lot without checking the bike lane and came inches away from hitting me. And I've also had instances where car doors have been opened up into bike lanes, and I've narrowly missed being, kind of hit by a car door and then sent into the traffic lane. So that's kind of like a question I would pose back on the legal side of it. Is like, who is at fault if I'm in a bike lane in a place I'm supposed to be, but then a car on accident swings their door open and then hits me, and then I go into the road. They might not have meant to do that. It's not, reckless necessarily, but do they have a duty to check the bike lane before opening their door if they're in the parking side?
So you pose the right question in civil law. What is the duty of the owner of the car, or the driver of the car, to a bicyclist where a bicyclist may be reasonably anticipated to be at the time? Like, did the car, so you have to look at the facts. It's all dependent on the facts. Did the person back into this spot and see the bicyclist, or would they have reasonable notice that a bicycle may or could have been there? So they have a duty to take just a peek out. You just can't slam your door open. If there's a bike lane right next to you, it makes no sense just to throw your door open. But how, or like, how is the driver of the car, how did he know, or should he have known, that a bicyclist may be in the area? How did the bicyclist present himself to the car driver? Was he wearing an orange vest? Was his vest lighted? Was his helmet have a headlight? I think it's fact dependent, but if a driver knew or should have known, this is the law, knew or should have known, or had reasonable inference to know, then he has a duty to the bicyclist not to open his door right into his lane of traffic. Also, if the bicyclist did see the car pull into the spot, they had to reasonably anticipate the door would open. So it works both ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And then let's say you're a cyclist, for the people listening. If you are in an accident of that nature, like, what should be one of the first steps you take? I know one thing that comes to mind for me as sort of like a preventative thing is you can buy a little camera for your helmet, sort of like a dash cam for a car, and you can set that up. And so you have physical evidence if you are in an accident that you can show when you're trying to get an attorney that you were not at fault. Because it's harder to get a witness than it is to just kind of keep your own record. So besides that, what would you say to do to someone who's been in a bike accident and they believe they might have a case?
Okay, first, I don't think we should be, everyone has to be so lawsuit conscious that we're driving around with videos and cameras on our helmets or ourselves, because if or might be something may happen, you have documentation to prove right or wrong. I feel like we shouldn't have to do that. If we could just, there's rules of the road and there's common sense also, right? So, but let's say your fact pattern, how do you prove that the other party was at fault? You don't have to prove you weren't at fault. fault. You have to prove that the other side was more than 50% at fault in causing your injury. Unfortunately, in bike accidents, the injuries are severe because you're going, 20 miles an hour, over 15 miles an hour, and the guy opens a door. You're obviously going to be hurled. Your head could smash into the concrete or break a leg or break an arm. You are severely injured. So in those situations, more than likely, the driver does call 911 because they're the ones that are in control of the ability to bring help to you. You're all, your stuff's all over the ground. You're probably severely injured. So the 911 comes, and the first thing that's really going to happen is you're going to be cared for by an ambulance. Or so for you to document what happens to build a case, you don't have to do that. No law imposes the duty on you. If there's a witness, there's another driver or someone else in the area, they'll probably come forward to the police and say, I just saw what happened. And the driver...
Get their names, right?
Well, you're in an ambulance.
Yeah.
The police are going to get their names. The police, it's going to be on the police report, which is available to all sit-ins electronically. The police will come to the hospital, or if you're able to get up on your own and just be treated by the emergency personnel at the scene, the officer will give you a police number, and you go online and you purchase the report. And in the report, it'll say that the police officers, as part of their job, they interviewed witnesses, they talked to the driver, and they talked to other parties because you weren't able to provide your story. You were injured. So also, in the city of Chicago, there's cameras everywhere. There's cameras upstairs by the city of Chicago, everywhere upstairs on light poles and signal poles, but also with this advent of Ring Central bells, there's so many sources of video now of a Burger King, an Arby's, a McDonald's, a CVS, Walgreens, all businesses, in order to document crime or trespassers or people that looted the store or could or might commit crimes. They have cameras everywhere.
Private homes too.
Yeah, with this Ring
side
doorbell I
streets,
was
yeah.
talking about. So we have a lot of documentation if you are in a business area. Almost certainly the accident could or might be captured on video, but if someone opens a door, that's the only reason you fell. And if someone claims it was a pothole that caused you to fall, we can go back to the scene with an investigator if you hire a lawyer and see if there was a pothole or some kind of obstruction on the ground that caused you to lose control and injure yourself. But as a bicycle rider, you're riding for joy and pleasure and to reduce congestion. And so there's no duty on a bicycle rider to document anything, right?
Ideally, yeah.
No, this is true because we have so much plethora of evidence that's going to be available through witness testimony, cameras, video, and just how could it possibly have been if you didn't do X, right?
Yeah.
I don't think we should be thinking about litigation ever, but as a lawyer, I'm telling you, you have protections in demonstrative evidence and witness testimony, and the city of Chicago has provided safety for you by driving in a bike lane. So if you're in the lane, you're not going to get hit by if you're in a bike lane, you're pretty well protected because the driver of the car knows it expressly says bike lane, or there's a bicycle in the lane. And usually when they're driving forward, you're giving me this scenario of the door opening.
Yeah.
Well, you probably passed the car. He passed you to get into the spot. So I think it's pretty well known that you were or could have been in the area. But most importantly, use common sense.
Yeah, everyone needs to use common sense. I think another challenge going back to that point is not all of the bike lanes are protected. Sometimes it's just paint.
Right.
And then what am I supposed to do then if a car or a truck, sometimes it's Amazon trucks and they're big.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just a car, but a lot of times it's just blocked.
I want to go back to your common sense, okay? You, right then and there, when there's an Amazon truck in your bike lane, the law says you are not allowed to just go into moving traffic. No, right? You gotta stop. You gotta look, and then you gotta take precautions. Just because the Amazon truck is there doesn't remove you from the duty of care and caution to other people on the road. You can't put yourself in a zone of danger. But you know what I thought we were going to talk about today besides this, which I enjoy talking about this subject, is pothole season. Now that the winter's
We
over.
can talk about pothole. Yeah.
Yeah, and the water, froze and created this hole. Now the ice has disappeared. What you have now is what I'm getting a lot of cases on is what is the duty of the city of Chicago? The bicyclist is hitting these potholes or these unforeseen potholes because they're looking straight where to go and they're surrounded by other bike drivers. The bike hits it, they're thrown over, fractured backs, skull fractures, concussions, serious injuries, right? Or we're seeing also, I don't know if your tire pops a lot.
Oh, yeah, it
That
happens.
what we're seeing, what I'm getting, my office getting a lot is, if you are selling a bicycle tire in Chicago and you know of the potholes and the cracks and the dangers and the obstructions, do you have a duty to tell the person you're selling the bike to about getting Kevlar tires or tires that are that don't puncture so easily? So what's happening right now? Because it's
Really?
April in
Interesting.
Chicago, is
Yeah.
people going in potholes, slipping over, or there's debris on the bikes that aren't so visible to the eye when you're riding, that are dangerous to bicycles, and the tires can't protect you from these. They puncture and also cause injuries. So the question is, are you at fault for not buying the right tire for your commute to and from work? Are you at fault for buying a thin tire? You should be buying a wider
Or are you
tire.
at fault for selling that?
Yeah, are you at
wrong
fault for
tire?
selling them, right?
Okay.
And not warning? Do you have a duty to warn? Like,
Wow.
you just moved here from Chicago. I'm going to let you know there's 5,000 potholes in the city of Chicago. And
Is the city responsible?
right. So these are all issues that lawyers grapple with on behalf of the clients that are injured. And one thing is, if the city designates a lane of travel for bicyclists or pedestrians, like a crosswalk, the city of Chicago puts two lines together. They said, you have to walk here, because we're not going to, no car drive, because when you are anywhere else, we're not going to protect you. You walk in the crosswalk, you're protected by us. If there's a pothole in there and you are riding a bicycle or walk into it and break your ankle, city of Chicago is 100% responsible for that, because they knew with reasonable foresight that they created this crosswalk for you to be in. They created the bike lane for you to be in. So there is a laws that protect you for failing to repair a pothole, but the pothole or the deviation in the street has to be, I think the rule in Chicago is over 3.5 inches. So it has to be known to the city.
Yeah, I was going to ask
also.
you about that. So, like, let's just say
There's a de
somebody,
minimis
like,
rule.
would you have the ability to go back and track whether there's been complaints against a pothole? And let's just say the city, you're able to dig and find out the city was made aware of it for a month, and it never got filled. Wouldn't that,
Yes.
constitute? Okay.
That's exactly what the law requires. And the city of Chicago does have a complaint department about a certain area. And even, I'm going to tell you one of the great benefits of, instead of having to look into the city files how many complaints were made, which are there for anyone to review. How about the homeowner? I'm going to tell you a story. Homeowner, the tree goes under the sidewalk, the roots keep growing and bust up the sidewalk, right? And the homeowner, sometimes it's easier just to go in front of the house and go, did you complain? How many times? And get the documentation from them. Because when you're a bicyclist, when you're allowed to ride a bike on the sidewalk, when the law permits them, and you hit this unforeseen deviation and you flip over and you're all broken up, sometimes the homeowner is the best resource that's in front of their house. We're doing a huge case right now where the city of Chicago, someone pulled a permit to do some work on a sidewalk in front of their store. It happened to be a place where you get Botox or a plastic surgery place where people look beautiful. So they wanted the sidewalks to look beautiful in front of their place of business. They asked the city if they would perform some work. The city allowed this permit. They picked someone to do the work. So they did the work, but they didn't barricade it or keep it safe, and the client didn't see it coming. This deviation, let's say in the sidewalk, of 10 inches, the levels, he's severely injured for life. And in that case, it was easy for our law firm to prosecute successfully this case because they pulled a permit. The permit said what should or should not be done, how the site should look at all times of day, whether it should be roped off cones, and that's an easy case. But if it's not like that, we do still have to resort to the Ring doorbells, the homeowner, or the complaint department that the city of Chicago does maintain of residents complaining. And it's usually residents complaining about potholes in front of their house or the store complaining about it. Like how many people are going to CVS, they're getting injured because there's this huge pothole. So the CVS usually complains also.
Got it. Yeah.
So there's a lot of ways to protect yourself if you are injured by a hidden defect.
Let's talk about a little bit of the stats. There's around 1,700 bike accidents last year that got registered, right? Around 2% end up with some serious injury. They go to the hospital by ambulance, that sort of a thing. They may be in the hospital. Those are clear cases of someone being injured. My question to you is, if I'm in an accident and maybe I get some scrapes on it and I fall off, but it's maybe a month later that all of a sudden my back has never really fully recovered. And I go to the doctor and I find out I actually have some injury from the accident. Because I think that from what I have read, that there's a lot of that does happen, maybe a month or two after an accident, that people are finding injuries. What should somebody do?
First, thank you for the question. We see that all the time. Like, my foot keeps getting caught by this cord. There's a cord under the table. But you tough it out. You read online, to put Bengay, you ice, you heat, you take it easy. And you try to go on WebMD or some kind of internet service, or, what could I do for my injuries? Because some people don't have insurance to go to the doctor, and they don't want to waste their day going to the doctor. They think they got it down with ice and heat and some kind of self-medication or help. So that's reasonable. A person took reasonable steps to get better on their own. They didn't get better. They finally go to the doctor, and the doctor finds, look, you have a small chip fracture in your lumbar spine. You have a hip fracture in your pelvis. You've torn a ligament in your knee. It's the heat and ice could never have cured. We have to do arthroscopic surgery and repair the medial meniscus, or any meniscus injury. So is it reasonable? Well, first of all, they take an MRI of your knee and say this is the only cause would have been the trauma that you suffered on April 4th if you go to the doctor on May 5th. So the MRI speaks for itself. The X-ray speaks for itself. So if you have self-medicated for 30 days and then the injury is getting worse and worse, and you're at the point that you have to go to an emergency room or a doctor, that doctor's testimony through the MRI is what's saving you to get money against the insurance company that insured the person who was responsible for your loss. Okay? Now, of course, the other side could fight this, but that's for the jury to determine what is more probably true than not true. So you're not punished by failing to seek official medical care at a recognized facility of medical care. You have the right to try to get better on your own.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be punished for that.